This is a little video tutorial about using PowerPoint for slide decks. PowerPoint is used every day, of course, for presentations, but increasingly PowerPoint is used for decks, and decks are files of PowerPoint that are sent around and read usually by people on their laptops, but as we'll see, sometimes they're reading them on their phones or even printed out on paper. The most important thing is to realize that there are two different ways that we can be using PowerPoint and adapt to the particular medium that you're using, because PowerPoint decks are really quite different than PowerPoint for presentation. All right, let's go through this presentation together. As I mentioned on the lead-in, PowerPoint can be used in two different ways. In presentations, of course, you're there to narrate the slides, which gives you an opportunity to say several sentences about each bullet point on your slide. And as you'll see here in the picture, you can use your hand gestures to lead people through from one place to another. When we're doing PowerPoint for presentation, because we can talk about what's on the slide, we have usually quite limited text on the slide itself. When you're sending around a PowerPoint deck, you're not there in person, and so the slides themselves must lead people through the narrative. And remember that people could be reading your slides on all kinds of different devices, possibly even on their phone, which gives a very small screen. And again, you're not there to lead them through. Let's think about what makes a good PowerPoint deck. First of all, begin with your audience in mind. If your audience is a bunch of iBankers, as we see here on the screen, don't waste time explaining them what a discounted cash flow is. They know that already. Don't burn up space in your presentation with things that your audience already knows. When you begin your presentation, begin with the big idea. What is it that you're going to tell me? Begin with what this slide deck tells us. So starting off with an agenda is really wasted space and doesn't add much value. The number of slides itself is not particularly important. If there are terribly too many slides, readers will begin to skip ahead, and if the slide deck goes on too long, they may simply abandon your slide deck. However, the file size is tremendously important. If the reader is reading it on a mobile system or logging in through somebody else's Wi-Fi, if you send a huge chunky file, they just may not be able to download and open it. Here's an example of what blows up slides. This is a print screen, and if I put that into a PowerPoint, this single image is nearly 1 megabyte. And if you put in too fat images that have not been compressed, you'll blow up your file size pretty quickly. Make sure that your presentation has a clear logic flow. Now, there's not one logic flow that works for all slide decks. Sometimes problem, solution, another problem, another solution, all the way through is the way to organize your presentation. Sometimes we go from the big picture, for example, oil prices are at 50 years low, to some detail, personal behavior of people buying cars, and then implementation as to what you should do as a result of that. There are other times when we do things just exactly the opposite way. We begin with a compelling example, somebody going and shopping for a new car, and then we draw the big picture conclusion about that. Whatever else, as you develop your logic flow, it should drive through towards the end. You've got to be having in mind the so what. Why did I look at this PowerPoint deck? The rule for presentation use of PowerPoint is that in general we should not have more than 5 lines of text with more than 8 words on each line. Now, we can do a lot more on PowerPoint that is being used for decks, but don't go overboard. And this example here is a slide that is too confusing. It has graphics and a lot more words than anybody is ever going to read. So if you have something that you need to say that takes pages and pages of text, well, pages and pages of text are a written report, and maybe you have to push back to your boss and say, I really don't think this is something I can do in just a simple PowerPoint deck. As you organize each slide, remember that people read from left to right, then they read from top to bottom. And if the order of your logic on a slide is not completely obvious, go ahead and put some arrows as to where you want people to follow you. Here's an example of a slide that speaks for itself, of reading from left to right. And then here's another one where the bullet points can be read from top to bottom. You'll notice there's not an excess of words on this slide. There's a rule that applies to PowerPoint for presentation. The rule is make your slide title your conclusion. Now, if you look within the blue lines here, imagine that's a slide shown on the screen. This is descriptive. The title says Lenovo market share in PCs and phones. But look at the next slide. The title here is Lenovo is just a niche player in mobile phones, really makes the point. And then we have the two call-outs. Although it's a leader in PCs, it's number 4 in smartphones. Now this slide works extremely well on a deck and tells exactly what you're trying to get across. Smart graphics are available within the PowerPoint files, and they can be useful, but try not to go overboard and use a graphic just because it's there. And in particular, don't suddenly switch from using one graphic, here a funnel shape, and then all of a sudden I'm making the same concept cogwheels. You can confuse your readers as you go from slide to slide. The last slide is an opportunity to give a clear summary. For example, we have a problem of low conversion. We did some research. The site was difficult to navigate, and the key finding was that most of the defections came after people had already put goods in the shopping basket at the payment process. So what we need to do is to outsource credit card processing. And here's the next step. We need to interview 3 credit outsources. This slide here gives you an idea of about, frankly, the number of slides that I want to see on a deck.